Well, I'm joined again by my two favorite political conversationalists, Amy Blancett, Nick Reed, Ozark's first contributors both. And we're going to throw a hot one at you now, no pun intended. Sex education in public schools. Just a little something.
I wonder what the pun was going to be.
See? Yeah, well, we won't go into that. It's a family show. So the question being, should there be sex education in public schools? I know at one point folks thought this was a settled issue. Yeah, you had it. I mean, I think we all had it growing up, but now it seems there's a pushback going on. Either people are taking their kids out of school to be homeschooled because they don't want that information being shared, or they just think philosophically it's not the role of the government and the school system to do. We'll start with Nick.
All right, so I think for a lot of us, 8th grade, I think it was 9th grade for me. Actually, I moved. I had it in 8th grade, and then when I moved, I got it twice. So I was like, I'm an expert at this by the time my freshman year rolled around. What qualifies as sex education has changed drastically.
Has it?
I think so. When I had it, maybe it was different. It was much about just the anatomically functioning aspect of man and woman. Okay?
Right. Did you have the heat maps? I had heat maps.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
I must be old, but we didn't do those.
Yeah, well, I don't know where you went to school, but nowadays, and I don't know that it's so much around here, but in this, you'll see this every so often pop up. It's more about the different types of and how people can explore or kids can explore and experience. So I think it is much, much different than what it once was. For me, largely it is about what is the purpose of school. And I really do believe, especially as we are in a world that is becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, and the jobs that kids graduate and then they go to college and they're competing for, whether it's just with a high school education or college education, they're competing against people all across the world. And so everything they're taught, I ask myself, do I believe that this is going to help them in that scenario? And while I do believe that there may be some very basic fundamentals when it comes to health, that can arguably be the case, I think we've gone into a realm where it is in no way, shape, or form. Not only is it not going to benefit young people when they get out into the real world in terms of competing, but it's actually a detriment because it's taking up time when we can learn other things to compete against students.
Here's the deal, though. If not in school, where? Because it's not the case. Yeah,
I failed as a parent. It's one of those where...
my parents did too, but they can't see this, so it's okay. The point is that, honestly, I didn't get a lot of information at home. So school was actually, that's how that goes.
My mom did a good job of having really awkward conversation with us when we were little. She took a psychology class. She'd gone back to school, or had started college as an adult, and she brought home this really awkward, psychology and things, sexual education. And so my sisters and I are sitting through this, and it was so extremely awkward. I appreciate that she did it, but it was awkward. In the health class, it was based on health, and there was a lot of anatomy. There wasn't so much on how you express yourself, but more of the safety of. We learned about the diseases and things like that my mom kind of covered, but it wasn't the same as seeing those very graphic pictures and then realizing that some of these diseases are lifelong, but more importantly, they're preventable.
Well, and I was going to say, too, unwanted pregnancy.
Yes.
We had talked about abortion a few weeks ago, right? I mean, there is a link between somebody at least knowing about protected sex on some level and not getting into a situation where abortion might be a consideration. So, but that doesn't take away from Nick's concern and folks who agree with that point of view.
And that is a concern, like as a parent, wondering, okay, what type are they educating my children? At what point? And that's where, again, when you involve government, it becomes very... Now we have to educate about all forms of, every type. We need to be inclusive, which I agree with, but not everyone does. Not everyone has those same beliefs. So I understand where people have discomfort in the idea that the school is going to teach beyond what I'm comfortable with my kids knowing. But also, like I said, I failed. My kids, anytime I tried to bring up even conversations about sex, like they're going to be so embarrassed watching this, even on the idea of, oh my gosh, my mom is talking about sex. So we did not communicate well, and I did not know as a parent how to break through that and have really good conversations about them respecting. I mean, we had those, like respect yourself, but the conversations they're having with their friends, and the conversation that then I got to have with a health teacher who was so open and was so comfortable, maybe wasn't, but pretended to be so comfortable. I had a safe place to go to ask questions. And I'm afraid if we say none at all, when a kid has a question and they can't go to their parents, they're going to go to YouTube. They're going to go to, you know, what means are they going to go to? I think we got to be careful when we say none at all. Then that means my child doesn't have a safe place, an outlet somewhere else, because I understand they don't want to come ask me about awkward sex questions.
Maybe it's the parents that need the classes
Right,
on how
I know.
to teach.
Yes.
Well, and I do think that you do, so, and this would be a gray area for some people, there is the reality of the biology and the anatomy, but I know that in some areas of the country, it's getting more into questions of personal morality for people. And to me, I think that's a family, that's a parent. I don't think in schools we should be really directing kids one way or another in that area, that, you know, the basics perhaps arguably from a science standpoint, biology standpoint, but when it comes to the decisions that one morally makes for him or herself, what to do with that knowledge, I think school's not a good place for that.
I agree. You know, it's that idea of when religion comes into play with how do we make those decisions, the idea of waiting until you're married. Now all of a sudden we get uncomfortable about that. You know, we appreciate the idea of telling our kids to wait, but then how do you keep religious beliefs out of that?
Well, and those two don't contradict. You know, learning about that information isn't a contradiction to waiting until you're married, because once you're married, that all is going to come into play anyhow.
Yeah, but there are people who say as soon as you start talking about it, it's the same idea with, well, if you had condoms available in school, that's going to encourage immoral behavior. So I think that's why we get into this binary. It's like nothing, or you end up having almost anything go.
And I honestly, I'm not sure what segment of the population any longer says nothing at all. I don't know the answer to that.
Well, from a policy standpoint, I think it's gone there because it's easier, as opposed to having to fight with the teachers' unions and everything else to say,
curricularly, where's the line?
And here's how you have to do it, because it would just not work as effectively. And plus, as a politician, you can claim credit for saying we shut that whole thing down, right? So, I mean, there's that. I digress.
No, but I mean, again, we go back to, can this time be also spent, and like you had said, in the education and talking about the culture of, so that, you know, I really didn't feel comfortable talking to anyone about it. And with first sexual experiences, there again was this weird, like there wasn't much conversation. We don't talk about it. And so then it becomes very hidden and very, you know, we talk about it being very sinful. And then all of a sudden one day it's not sinful because you had this activity. So it's just this really strange culture that we have that goes along with its relationship to sex and sex education and healthy sex.
I have a great idea.
I still don't understand any of it.
I think we should continue this on our podcast.
Yes.
Oh.
Lots to discuss.
From the constituency, featuring myself talking to these two who are Ozark's first contributors, Amy Blanchett and Nick Reed. Again, we really appreciate it. We have solved nothing except maybe some parents are going, yeah, I got a lot I got to work on. At any rate, we'll be back after this.
Least favorite conversation.
Hey, but you know what?
We have a 10-year-old.
I hate that it's uncomfortable.
I know.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
I hate that. Culturally.
And I do think some problems that we've created, particularly in an effort to make it comfortable, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but in an effort to make it uncomfortable, we send the message that, hey, there's absolutely no stigma at all. It's totally cool, do what you want. But then, so they're kind of like, oh, hey, and they're taking videos of each other. And
here we go.
Right.
3.
What are we talking about?
This is going to be the Billy Graham rule.
Oh, okay.
I'll explain.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, this is an interesting one.
3, ready? Yep. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Well, here we are sitting at a table. We could have dinner together. Except if one of us were gone, I think the Billy Graham rule would fall into effect. What am I talking about? Well, folks, welcome to Ozarks Tonight. I'm Brian Calfano, and this is Nick Reed and Amy Blanchett. In the news, because recently the Republican candidate for governor in Mississippi refused to have a reporter shadow him during the day. She's a female, and he says he holds to the Billy Graham rule, which, if you don't know what that is, essentially says, as a man, I will not have time alone with a woman unless someone else, presumably another man, is present. So, well, there's some pushback. Some people think that's antiquated. Others say, no, this is appropriate if you're trying to uphold values and not give the impression of impropriety. But women a lot of times say that holds them back because then they can't get access. So one of that reporter's competitors, male competitors, gets that job, gets to shadow that candidate, gets the scoop, and does a better job, I guess, because of that. So let's start with Amy, since we're talking about something that's got a kind of a gender thing.
It is so difficult.
Billy Graham rule.
Yes. So I understand. I mean, I understand, especially in today's day and age where a lot of the topics that we're talking about, individuals feel uncomfortable in many different situations. I dealt with this at work where an individual had felt uncomfortable, didn't let any of us know, and it kind of spiraled.
And let's not forget the Me Too movement that kind of overshadows all of this. Yeah.
And so it's sometimes what I mean to say and what I meant to say, but the intent that someone else took it, they become offended very quickly. And it's, well, this person said behind closed doors this thing, and it was offensive, and now I'm a victim. So I understand where a man would say, I feel uncomfortable being alone with a female just to protect myself. But the same for a female. I feel uncomfortable that I could say something so it's kind of across the board. So I understand it. But more the idea of being so demeaning to a female, and like you had mentioned, that she doesn't get the job or that she doesn't get the interview because this individual feels that he has so little self-control that he can't be around a female without saying something inappropriate
or doing something
inappropriate. So, like, I understand where they're coming from, but man, to think that we're in a culture where you can't keep your hands to yourself when the door is closed, so you got to create a rule about it, it is demeaning.
Nick.
Well, I think there are a couple of aspects of this. One, in the particular case you cite, there are a couple of different explanations that seem maybe they cross over a little bit.
Sure.
And one of them is it's referred to as the Billy Graham rule, and that's where Billy Graham just never, because he was a man of God.
And he was almost cornered. He was almost framed once, I think, in France. They tried to have him walk into a situation where he was going to be photographed with a woman, and they were going to try to make that out to be he was having an affair. So there's a backstory to all of that.
Well, and even that aside, Billy Graham was a humble individual who understood that all human beings, no matter how hard you desperately try to be godly, are susceptible to falling. He understood that. And so he adopted the belief system that why put myself in a position, as unlikely as I believe it ever would be, if it isn't absolutely necessary. And so that's what that rule is, and that seemingly was the reason that candidate had given. At the same time, his campaign talked a little bit about, well, the appearance of it, and you never know. I think a lot of people after the Calfano hearings that guilty until proven innocent, sort of sometimes in a political
situation, that's a lot different than if you're doing HR at a workplace where they're doing an investigation.
And I would say, and this wasn't a job necessarily. It wasn't that somebody was denied a job. She just wanted to trail him. And sometimes politicians will allow, candidates will let reporters follow them, kind of get behind the scenes.
But it is a scoop, and it did go to a guy because of that.
And I would also support if it were the other way around, and if you had a female running for governor who said, I'll do it, you're a guy, but there's got to be a woman here as well, so that I would understand that. I would completely understand that. So I don't think that it's a scenario where only women can be on the receiving end of that. It can easily be a guy, that finds himself in that situation.
And it's one of those things. So today I was traveling. I came out of an elevator, and I'm in St. Louis, and I see someone from Springfield who's exiting the elevator with a female. And immediately I was like, wait a second. They're traveling for business. They're both in business attire. They're headed to a business meeting. And I'll say, I realize
you're feeding into the problem.
I realize that
you are the problem, Amy.
I realized that my first thought was, wait a second. And then I put myself in check and said, they're here for business. Like, why would I even do that? So like I said, I understand.
Well, then maybe there's something to this.
No, I understand But again, it's because right now there is so much media and there is so much going on about how dishonest everyone is and how we're all out to say, inappropriate things are being said. So when we overdo it in the media, we become hypersensitive. And right now we're all very hypersensitive. Every word that comes out of our mouth, what might the intention that someone else, or every way that I'm seen, as a female who is turning into an advocate, not intentionally, someone sees me doing something now that's not, according to what you or I said on this thing, and all of a sudden it's like, well, we can't listen to them. So, there's this huge conflict of we're so sensitive to this idea of like, I caught you.
Well, and two things. One, it would not be unprecedented, human beings faltering in that way, but even, Petraeus, that was his great fall, a female that was writing a book about him. A couple of years ago, his name escapes me, Lowry perhaps, but he was head of security for, I think it was the Senate Arms Intelligence Committee, and he was having an affair with a reporter from the New York Times. And so it does happen. People do have affairs.
But not because they sat down at dinner
but
to discuss
true.
business once.
But the argument is if they didn't sit together, they wouldn't have the opportunity. But
Snapchat, are you kidding me? Right now you have every opportunity to seek someone out.
Well, it's one less. It's one less step.
Yeah. It's the honest one where you sit down together versus the social media one behind
you won't
scenes.
be photographed, I guess, is the idea.
Well, unless someone.
Yeah.
And in that scenario, but and call me, I don't know, Pollyannish, but what I genuinely, when I first heard this, and what I thought is, here's a guy who is really, really committed to his wife, and he never ever wants her to even worry or wonder, particularly given what he does for a living. And to have something that, again, if I'm just being golly gee, he's just a genuine good person that wants his wife to feel totally secure, and because of that, it's turned into this sort of issue. And, freedom of press, it means a lot, but I don't know that it overrides a happy marriage.
Well, all I know is we're in compliance here. We could actually order in. So
Are we, though? I feel a little uncomfortable being only one female between two men. Isn't that another concern?
We'll have to pick this up on the podcast. From the constituency, folks. And it's Ozarks Tonight with Amy Blanchett and Nick Reed. We'll be back after this.